Hopefully this goes through. Okay, so these are types of writings that you'll find on the ACT, but also that you'll find in any English class, really. And we're going to talk about kind of how to approach them. And those are narrative, descriptive, expository, argumentative, and technical kinds of writing. So, how many of these are you already familiar with? Awesome. Okay. You realize you don't have to write them down at the beginning because I'm going to go over all of them, right? Okay, good. Just so we know. All right. Narrative writing is what we're talking about when we're referring to a story. So any writing that tells a story, fiction or nonfiction, narratives, if they are imagined or fiction, if they're based on real events, they're nonfiction, right? So those characteristics are that they have a plot, right? They've got a sequence of events that we can follow. They have characters, and in nonfiction, characters are called subjects, okay? Subjects. They often have dialogue, though that's not necessarily required. And they have other literary elements like irony, symbols, all the other kinds of good stuff that you learn in English class. On the ACT reading, there's a section called prose fiction. They're going to give you a piece of a novel or a short story or a biography. And then that's where it's going to be on the ACT. When you are annotating narrative writing, you're doing the same thing that we did yesterday with dinosaur, okay? You're looking for who, what, when, where. So this is how you identify a narrative. If you're not sure what you're reading, look and see if you have characters and see what they want. They should have GTA, which in our case is goals, traits, and actions. Yep, every year. So the goals, what do they want, right? Every character wants something, even if it's only a glass of water. So read for that. Yesterday, what did our character want? Yeah, wanted to be a dinosaur, right? So he had a goal of sorts, or at the very least, his goal was to be himself and not what other people said he should be, right? Then traits. Traits are how we define our characters. In fiction writing, we call this characterization, right? Where we're trying to make characters that are realistic. So we want to know what type of people they are. If we're going to talk about our dude from yesterday, what type of person would you say he is? Like, what defines him? He's kind of nerdy. I mean, he's good at math and he's an accountant. Intelligent. Tax accountant. True. Easily influenced, right? He is very influenceable, or at least very concerned about what other people thought about him, right? Those are all traits. And then the last one is actions. What type of actions move the story along? And in our case, they were the words of his parents and his teachers, right? Other actions were what he did as a child versus what he did as a young man and what he did as an adult and then an aging adult. And an action can even be something like forgetting, right? His forgetting moved the story along at the end, right? Like literally time was connected to his action. So GTA is really easy to help you figure out characters. So I highly recommend it. As soon as you meet a character that you're looking at in writing that's fiction, you want to ask, what do they want? What sort of person are they? And how are they moving things along? Like, what are they doing? So I know you know quite a bit about plot, because that was the first thing that you were given last year as sophomores, was like a plot diagram. So our beginning is exposition, right? Our emotional high point is the climactic moment, and it ends with the resolution. Though I think it's fair to say that not all stories resolve evenly. How does your story from yesterday resolve? Feel like you're asking the wrong question here. Yeah, it's difficult to see the resolution of the story. We're told that he becomes a dinosaur, and it's really hard for us to tell what that means figuratively, since we know we can't take it literally. If he's really a dinosaur. Okay, so tips when you're reading narrative. Look for the narrator. And dinosaur, who is the narrator? And don't say the guy, because it's not. An outside omniscient narrator, a person, a being who knows everything, right? All-knowing. Inferences, which is something they're going to ask you to do on the ACT, something I'm going to ask you to do, are educated guesses about the goals, traits, and actions of a character, or educated guesses about what will happen next in the plot. So if I ask you to infer something, I'm asking you to guess how characters will act based on what you already know. So I'm going to ask you to make an inference right now. We know that our tax accountant guy was married at some point. Is he still married? Does it say that in the story? But how do you know? I agree with you that he is not married. How do we know, though? He dies by himself. Well, that's upsetting, but yes. What do you say? You said he has kids, and he refers to them briefly, and he refers to divorce. But he doesn't ever mention who he had kids with, right? Maybe he did forget. So I guess what I'm saying here is we do not necessarily know from the text that our character is divorced. But that is something that we can infer. At the very least, we can infer that he is not together with the person he had children with. It is pretty sad. But, I mean, that would be a good example of an inference, okay? So, I'm a big fan of when you're annotating, circling characters' names or putting stars where they speak, because characters will tell you who they are by what they say, right? So, that being said, that will help you identify GTA. There is one exception to this rule, and I want to bring it up because I think it's super interesting. In general, when characters speak, you learn about what sort of person they are and what they say. And the exception I found is if you've watched the series You on Netflix. What that dude says is not what is happening and is not what is going on in the story or the plot at all. And it's the weirdest thing when you are literally watching the narrator tell you a lie. So weird. Like, you can see what's going on. You can see the truth. But when he narrates, it's all lies. So, I'm not necessarily recommending or not recommending that. I'm just saying in general, characters tell you what they mean. Joe doesn't. Joe. He's a creep, but he's an interesting creep. Okay. This next one. So I know you know a lot about how to do So when you're annotating, you're really thinking about characters, okay? Descriptive writing is the picture. I would actually include poetry, even though poetry can also be narrative, okay? It's meant to show the audience something, meant to give them an image. It may feel like a narrative, but it doesn't necessarily have plot. It creates a sensory experience for the audience. It might use lots of descriptive words and adjectives. It also might not. It tends to be quite specific. On the ACT, you are very unlikely to read poetry, but if you do, it'll be in the humanities. However, I'm going to teach you a way to read poetry. I'm getting the expository writing out of the way because it's a little less fun. But yeah, descriptive writing creates a picture, creates an experience. And like I said, most poetry falls under this category, though there's some narrative poetry. Anybody here familiar with the poem The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow? Listen, my children, and you shall hear, right? That's descriptive, but ultimately it is a narrative poem because it tells a specific story, okay? So it's up to you to decide whether or not a piece of writing has plot, okay? Because it might be a narrative poem. All right, can I move on? Okay, so when you're reading description, you're going to identify the person, place, or thing being described. You're going to identify, like, ultimately what that piece of writing is centered around, the subject. You should also make sure there's no true plot, you know, like a beginning, middle, and an end to what you are reading. The purpose of description is aesthetic, okay? It's meant to be beautiful. And if what you read is simply pretty or simply captures an emotion or an image, that's the single easiest way to see if what you're reading is descriptive, okay? So, and there's not a lot of descriptive writing. The reason I include it is because I don't think poetry is fun. I don't know. And you do literature, but it's often not narrative literature. Okay. Ooh. Y'all take notes down word for word. So I can sum up that last bullet point by just saying aesthetic. Like, is it aesthetic? Is it pretty? Pretty. Oh yeah, I mean Edgar Allan Poe, right? Yeah, all of his poems are very narrative poems. Honestly, at least most of the ones I have in my head. But yeah. So yeah, looking that way when you read a poem and if there's like a story involved in it, you're like, oh, okay, this is a narrative poem. That'll be helpful. Expository writing. The explanation. It's meant to inform you of something or to explain a process. Expository means to lay out, right? So like you're laying out something. Yeah, it could be how to do something. So a process, it could be cause effect, showing how things happen. Could be definitional essay, showing what something is or isn't. It could be historical, showing change over time. Or it could be informative, discussing a little known topic. You will note that I do not have argumentative on here. The reason I don't is because I separate them. All argumentative writing is also expository writing. But I separate them because I think of them as separate purposes. On the ACT, there is a social studies reading section and a natural sciences reading section. What form do these take? So okay, that's one. I would describe this as an essay, right? Expository writing is often essay. Mostly essay. News articles, magazine articles often fall under this expository umbrella too. And what's interesting is the ACT usually takes like a magazine article from Discover magazine or National Geographic to have you read. All speeches start as expository writing that are prepared speeches. You write first to explain or to discuss something before presenting it, right? So prepared speeches are often expository. In forensics, we call this the informative. Are we ready? Okay. Here's how you read exposition. You look for the thesis. The main idea is what they're constantly saying in standardized tests. What is the main idea of this test? Like if you were to get 10 fails, what is the one thing you should understand? In writing, it's always the thesis. And you should underline it as you underline it for. And then figure out the essay's purpose. Is this for, like what is it for? And who is the audience? Like who is the type of person who's supposed to be reading this? The first and last sentence of every paragraph helps with that. If you don't read any other part of an essay, if you read the first and last sentence of each paragraph, you're going to get what you need as a generalized rule. I tend to underline or star them to keep my place. Like, oh, here's the main point, but here's a supporting detail or a piece of evidence. Fiction or prose has characters and plot. Nonfiction has topic sentences and thesis statements. So when you approach a piece of writing, you got to shift your thinking. Like, I'm no longer looking for characters or voices. I'm looking for, points of explanation, right? And their examples. When people do that, I'm like, it's such a weird genre. Like, because there's been kids at Wakini who've done like things on mermaids, I guess, like an inform on mermaids. And I'm like, that's never going to do well because all you're doing is saying what people thought mermaids were. Like, you're probably just debunking mermaids. You know what I mean? Like, you're probably not actually talking about mermaids. Right. Then I suppose they'd be like, this is a prose. You're in the wrong category. Right? Because informative speeches are supposed to be expository. So if they're not real, you're in the wrong event. It'd be fun though. Are you ready to move on? All right, argumentative writing. It's the claim plus reason. It's meant to advance a particular point of view. Yes, all argumentative writing contains explanations, but the question is it leading us to take a side? Instead of a thesis, it has a claim. I mean, I know you've probably used those words interchangeably for a while. Now, when you make an argument, that's a claim, okay? You should look for the word should or will. We should do this thing because. I will do this thing because. And you usually have the word because right before the reasons. It often takes the form of a problem solution. I know you all did PSAs with Mrs. Tomsick. That's argumentative, right? Problem solution. So yeah, the major difference is that can do an argumentative writing. It doesn't have to be just like one opposing idea. Like, for example, in the sciences section, they might have two passages that you read, okay? And they're two separate scientists. Scientist one says Mars was formed when it got hit by an asteroid, and that's how it got atmosphere. Scientist two says I think Mars's atmosphere was formed very slowly over time. It wasn't an event. So those are both argumentative because they're saying this is how Mars was formed. But it's argumentative because not everybody necessarily would believe that particular point of view or have the evidence to support it. What other argumentative writing have you done? I only know the PSA. Problem solution? Compare contrast? Not all compare contrast are argumentative, but they often are. All right, may I move on? The last slide. Well, last important slide. Find the claim, find the reasons of an argument. First or second paragraph, last line. If you can't find it there, skip to the end. Usually they repeat it. Look for bias. What does our writer seem to believe? If the writer isn't trying to take a specific point of view or support a viewpoint, you're probably looking at expository writing. Because there is a difference between informing somebody about mermaids and trying to convince somebody that mermaids are the best thing ever. Two separate points of view. In the ACT and what you're reading will kind of like ask you what the author would or wouldn't agree with based upon their point of view. Okay, so you got your Mars scientist. Your Mars scientist who believes that Mars was the atmosphere was formed by an asteroid versus the Mars scientists who believe the atmosphere was formed slowly over time with water. Which of these scientists is more likely to believe that at some point there was life on Mars? Why? So yeah, if you can't find the main point or the main argument of the piece of writing, first of all, it's probably not particularly like good argument, but check the last paragraph. They'll let you know. All right. This last one, you don't have to write anything down except for what I tell you to write down, so it's going to be short. Last one's technical writing. This is actually what comp is starting to do right now. My composition class, they're going to put together their resume. Resume is technical writing. I mean, I guess you could say it's expository, then it explains something, but it's not trying to explain something with a bunch of words. It's trying to do it as concisely as possible. Technical writing or workplace communication is meant to be the thing is that very specific purpose, specific knowledge. So when we think of manuals, reference guides, templates, instructions, memos, recipes, and cover letters, those are all technical. And everybody's career has a kind of technical writing associated with it. I cannot tell you how many workshops I've done on how to use particular piece of technology for students, right? And usually there's some kind of online or webinar to explain how to do it. You don't want anything extra in technical communication. You want exactly what you need to know, and you don't want anything else. As a matter of fact, like if you're needing to look up something, say about your car, right, or vehicle, if you open the manual, you don't just read the manual until you find what you're looking for. You look at the table of contents and be like, why is this light on? That's, I mean, and that's the best thing about technical writing. Diagrams, pictures, anything to get to the point as quickly as possible with as little waste of time. A lot of people really need and prefer technical writing in their jobs, right? Which is why tech careers make the big bucks. It's complicated. Like it's not easy to understand. But technical writing is supposed to simplify it for you. Okay. In technical writing, you know it when you see it, right? Often it has jargon. It's going to tell you straight up what it's for, okay? It's objective, it's factual. There's nobody's opinion in a technical manual. But they're like, well, this is how I think you should change your spark plugs. No, this is a problem. There is only one way to do that. And you should do it the correct way. There's no writer's personal point of view. You can't tell who wrote a manual. That's the point. Anybody should be able to give you the same idea. Number of diagrams, data, all of those go with technical writing. Now, the reason a resume is technical writing, is because it's supposed to get to the point of who the person is as quickly as possible. You should be able to glance at a resume and know who the person is, what they're applying for, and their basic qualifications. That's why resumes fall under technical writing, workplace communication. Okay? Have you done technical writing in your previous classes? Done a how-to anything? How-to is generally technical communication, right? You don't want to waste anybody's time. You're like, these are the steps you follow. I did that this summer. And sometimes when you rely on a YouTube video instead of a piece of technical writing, they're like, and this is my grandma's recipe. Recipes are technical writing. Did you know that? Like they're in a specific field. They're meant to be as simple as possible. Yeah, recipes are technical writing. I was trying to figure out how to make a stock tank pool this summer. Okay? I watched like 50 different YouTube videos, and finally, I was like, I don't like this video thing. I want someone to be like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And I finally found it, and it worked out. We want our technical writing to be clear.